it really is amazing how you've had these experiences, and love has kind of kept you almost in this protective place, like with the Benny Hinn ministry or with the church that you eventually left. Did you feel at any time like your perspective was swayed because of their dogma, or you were able to hold your own because of love?
I think because I didn't have a religious childhood, the beliefs that I developed were my own. So I wasn't influenced by adults. Like in the four spiritual laws, the very first one is you are sinful and separated from God. Do you know how wrong that is?
You're listening to Shall We Unpack This? With your host, Leilani Carrasco.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the SWAT podcast and a new bi-monthly format every other week instead of a weekly thing. Just seemed like the right thing to do as we head into the summer. And from there, who knows? It's just by the seat of our pants here on the SWAT podcast. So today I am honored to share this interview with a dear friend. She's a bonus mama. What better time to celebrate Mother's Day coming up this weekend than to interview a bonus mama? But what's interesting about this interview is I'm nervous to share it. And I was talking with my guest, Denae, about how ironic it is that I had an episode on BDSM and that didn't make me uncomfortable. But even the title, like sharing a religious-esque or anything to do with God, I'm afraid it's going to scare so many people like me, away. People I know, I mean, most of my friends have left the church, have deconstructed from religion. And so to throw anything out there that has any inkling of that in it, I'm afraid I'm going to I'm afraid I'm going to scare everyone away. And thus, they will miss out on just the beautiful story that Denae has. She's lived all walks of life, from a military life where she traveled the world with her family to sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the Jesus movement, working for Benny Hinn, having miracles that are just bonkers happen to her, and to a place where she no longer goes to church, but she is one of the most deeply spiritual, powerful hearts that I know. And I'm so thankful to have her in my life because having left the church myself, but still being a very spiritual person, I can be easily shaken by people that say, your heart's not in the right place, or, well, you're just off living a sinful life. And they don't even look at my heart. So to have someone in my life that sees my heart and knows that it's nothing to do with church, religion, dogma, all that bullshit, all that pressure, all that yuck. It's all about love at the end of the day. So without further ado, let us get into Denae's journey with love, the creator, Jesus, and everything in between.
I would say around 3 years old. My parents had people over, and I could hear laughing in another room, and they were playing cards, and I was sleepy. I had all my dolls lined up in front of my crib. I even had to ask my parents about that. And there was, yes, you would line them all up and talk to them and put them to bed. And I was like, okay, I'm not crazy. I didn't. But this figure appeared in my doorway, was all white and light, and came up to my crib. And I wasn't fearful. It was just beautiful. It was just beautiful, beautiful. And looked at me and said, Denae, you're special. Those were the only words. And then it was just like, it just faded back and went away. And I never, ever forgot it. And I believe it has colored every step of my life experience with God. And my parents due to some things that happened in their early marriage, were really turned off of religion. They weren't turned off of Jesus. They weren't turned off of God. They just didn't want to go to church.
Okay, yeah, just stay away.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, that was not a good experience.
Yeah.
Let's not do
I
that.
can relate. I'm kind of in that same camp right
There's
now.
a lot of people in that
Yeah.
camp,
Yeah.
and myself included. So I didn't grow up religious. I grew up in a family of love. I grew up in a family of very moral people, and very giving and generous people. And so that was my upbringing. With my dad being in the military, we never lived any place longer than 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I lived a lot of places in the States and overseas. And I learned that not everybody sees things the same way. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have any knowledge of denominations or any knowledge of theology or dogma, nothing like that. I would just go to church with whoever asked me. Okay. So I had some pretty varied experiences as a child. Yeah. And even with groups that Christianity would say are a cult.
So what was an example of one?
The Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
And I went with them for probably 6 months to a year. I had great experiences. Every place I went, I met loving people. And as a child, when I came home from church, my parents weren't moaning and groaning about the pastor or the deacons or the message or any of that. I didn't have any of that. All I had was the good experiences that I had where I went.
Yeah.
So we moved to Abilene, I guess when I was probably about in the 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And a friend invited me to church, and I went to this little Baptist church. And I loved it. I fell in love with it. I had the best youth pastor, the best pastor. I loved every one of the kids. We were the Jesus Movement kids.
Wow.
We wanted the guitars and out in the park, and went to Dallas for the big Expo 72, where we filled just the arena, Cowboy Arena.
Oh wow.
And Billy Graham came, and it was we just thought we were it.
That's incredible. Yeah.
It was a great time for me. And then I graduated from high school in 73, and I just kind of quit going to church, just very not methodically. I was just tired, or I was working, mm-hmm. and got out of the habit. And then in 1975, I got a Christmas card from a friend that lived out in Odessa. And boy, it was booming in 75 in Odessa. That was just the beginning of a big oil boom out there. Uh-huh. So I went out there and got a job. And let's just say that's when sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I love it. And working in the oil field as a woman in the 70s, we were a minority. It was one of the few times that you could go someplace and live someplace where men outnumbered the women.
Wow.
So we kind of had our pick.
Yes.
And I went to work for an oil company and worked my way up. And my boss sent me to college to get an accounting degree, and became my very, very close friend, like a father. Mm. And so I had a great time working full-time, going to school full-time, and partying full-time. Oh, wow. Very little time for sleep. And doctors back then would prescribe amphetamines. It was the 70s. They weren't really that, nobody was paying attention. Mm-hmm. So I had a doctor that I went to in Midland, and he prescribed amphetamines. So that's why I could do, full-time school, full-time work, and full-time partying.
Wow. You were living it up.
I was living it up. I was having a ball. Uh-huh. And I had made a lot of money, which allowed me to travel and allowed me to experience a lot of things and to learn a lot of things, to learn how to ski, to learn how to travel in a big city by myself, or with some girlfriends. And so during all those travels, I was the person that would have a few drinks or smoke a joint and tell everybody there about Jesus. I was a preacher. I was a preacher. I never was one to get fully drunk because I couldn't stand being out of control.
Okay.
But just have a few drinks or smoke a joint, and I was going to preach because I love Jesus so much.
Amazing. Even in all of this. And
Even
people would say,
in
no,
all
you
of this.
didn't. Look at you living the ways of the world
I
and
know.
liking it.
For me, and this is just me,
Mm.
I met God through Jesus, through the Christ. Do I think he's the only Christ? No. And I have learned that he's not. But for me, and at my age, my closest connection with God is Jesus.
Mm.
Do I have to have Jesus to connect with God? No, I don't. But I love Jesus. So through all of that and going through 2 abortions and a miscarriage and horrible relationships, I met a young man and fell in love. And I was about 28. He was 26. He was an engineer. And just about the time I was thinking, this could really go somewhere, he got a cancer diagnosis. And he had a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that was right in a lymph node that had grown around his heart.
Oh my gosh.
And so it was a very, very dire time. And you got to remember, this is back in the 70s. We didn't have everything that we do now. And lymphoma is very manageable now.
Oh.
But he went through 2 years of treatments and 2 years of agony, and he passed away. About the time he passed away, actually about a month before, my boss that had sent me to college also died. There was a difference in how they died. My boss was in his early 70s, and he had hospice care. That was my first introduction to hospice. And my engineer guy didn't, because he was so young. They didn't really do hospice back then. They would do everything imaginable to save you. So he died screaming in pain. It was horrible, horrible death. While my boss had his 2 sons, his wife and me, hospice nurse, their pastor, the hospice chaplain around his bed.
Mm-hmm.
The hospice people were so wonderful. They told us, this is it. He's conscious. He just can't speak because he doesn't have the energy. Y'all tell him goodbye. And, and this is it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And so we all went around the bed and we all sat on the bed and held his hand and kissed his cheek and told him goodbye. And his wife was the last one to sit on the bed. And she sat on the bed and she whispered things in his ear and held him. And it was just so precious.
Yeah.
And as she sat back up and was kind of holding his hand, he took his last breath. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced, because it was so wonderful to have people there to tell you, okay, this is what's happening. This is what you can do. Oh, it was very nurturing, and it was encompassing. They just had us all there. It was beautiful. Well, as he drew his last breath, I was just watching his spirit go, and it was like, did I see it with these eyes? No. I saw it with different eyes that I didn't even know I had,
Wow.
It was in my brain, just like I was watching a movie.
And enough to take you by surprise?
Absolutely. I was like, holy crap. No, I said, holy shit. What is going on? How can I see this?
Right.
And I saw the heavens open up, and I experienced this music and this colors and these clouds and this, like I had never experienced. I still can't explain it to anybody. And I'm looking around the room like, can anybody else see this?
Mm-hmm.
But I know better than to speak it. It wasn't the right time to say anything, So after we finished, and that went on for, I don't know how long. It might have been a minute. It might have been 5. And I was just like, as long as I could, I was not going to turn my head away.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, and I didn't have my eyes closed, y'all. When I saw this, my eyes were wide open and I was seeing it. It has defied logic, and I'm a pretty smart person.
Yes.
But it defied logic. And that started me on a path. I made a lot of money doing accounting. And the company that I left that company for and went to work with, I was a CFO. And I was very, very in my masculine energy.
Okay.
And in Odessa with a bunch of men,
Yeah.
you had to be.
Yeah.
And when all this happened, I just couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't not go to church anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted some spiritual people around me because I really wanted to talk about what happened.
Oh. Okay.
I really wanted somebody that knew what that was. And how, what was that? Was that heaven or was that, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I heard an advertisement on the radio about a church's singles group. And so the next Sunday I got up and made my way there. And I felt like the woman, what was that book, The Scarlet Letter? That had this letter on her chest, like, you are a whore. And everybody could look at me and go, she is good sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Absolutely.
Avoid her.
Yeah, they just smell it on you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt probably the first couple of months I was there, but I kept going. It was a wonderful group. There was like 100 people in there. And that's a lot of single people to be.
It is.
To be in a church group. And it was a Baptist group. And I eventually got to know people. And, I was living in the oil field. Everybody cussed like sailors, and I did too. So I was terrified going to church. Like, I know I'm going to say something that's really, people are going to turn around and say, would you please not come here anymore?
Yes.
But I had a wonderful experience, and I got to meet the people. And most of the people, because I was 30, most of the people were married and divorced.
Oh, by then.
Not very many 30-year-olds that had not been married.
Yeah.
So I was sort of an anomaly. Mm-hmm. But I met wonderful people. I found out that they'd been sex, drugs, and rock and rolling too. So I didn't feel quite so bad. I didn't feel like everybody else was really good and better than me. And I was, and I had gone to work for hospice because right after my guy died and my boss died, there was a hospice training for volunteers. It just so happened, like 3 weeks after I'd been through that experience. So I definitely want to do that. I was like, I want to go back to that. I want to see that again. Wow. I want to go be with people that are dying. Yeah. And it was my niche. I'm not kidding. I loved oil field. I loved numbers, not near as much as I loved hospice. And so I went to work for hospice doing their accounting. There was a job opening, and of course, I was a volunteer for a couple of years. And then this job opening came up for accounting. So they'd never had anybody do accounting before. So I went to work for them, and I took a 75% cut in pay. So I had to, I'd never bought a car before because I had company cars. So I had to buy a car. I sold my mobile home and moved into an apartment and learned how to live on a whole lot less money.
Yeah.
But I was so happy to work, 18 hours a day. And what happened is back in those days, we didn't have the Medicare benefit for hospice. So we depended solely on what we could bill insurance companies and our donations. So a lot of times, many times, it'd be one of the nurses would come in and say, can you come help me? I've got to give this guy an enema and I don't have anybody to help me. Sure. Like,
oh my gosh, can you imagine?
Come do this? Can you come do that?
Wow.
Sure. I'd chomp at the bit for every chance I got to go be by the bedside.
Wow.
And so eventually I got to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, I always did that, even checking on our volunteers, because I couldn't stay away from it. I just loved it so much. Yeah. I loved being by the bedside when somebody died, because I never had that experience again like I did with my boss. But it was so sacred and so pure and so holy. Mm-hmm. And so I really became addicted to it in the sense that that's all I wanted to do. And so that really was where my I feel like I had come into my own. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I love to do.
Mm.
And so I did that. We also, back in the 80s, was probably about 82, 83, HIV and AIDS came on the scene.
Mm.
Back in those days, people died after diagnosis. If they started on AZT, they were lucky to last 2 years.
Mm.
And AZT was so expensive. It was almost $2,000 a prescription.
Oh my gosh.
So when somebody died, we would go get all their medications so we could give them. And I didn't have a license. You know, nurses have license, doctors have license, social workers have licenses that would be in jeopardy if they knew somebody went and got their drugs and passed on. Well, I didn't have a license. I wasn't afraid anybody's going to do anything.
Yeah, you were right under the radar.
I was right under the radar. So I
Wow.
would go and get medications and be sure that patients that couldn't afford it would have them, not knowing at all that AZT was killing them.
Oh,
But
yeah.
that's something I've had to
Sit with
forgive
it.
myself for.
Who'd have thought, though?
Who'd have thought? We didn't know. We were ignorant. We didn't know.
Yeah.
And but anyway, so hospice began to have AIDS patients, and so that really became my my place to be. And I got real involved with the Salvation Army, who had a group for AIDS patients. I helped get a 501c3 for them, and I became very involved. It was my hospice job and then my AIDS job. We would go to the gay bars and do fundraisers and pass out condoms. So that took me down a path of working with HIV and AIDS and still working for hospice and still doing bedside stuff. I worked a lot with AIDS patients that were dying, that needed to do one last thing, talk to their parents, see their grandparents, do, that thing that they wanted to do before they died.
Mm.
So I'd come through 8 years of working with AIDS patients and people with HIV that weren't sick yet. And I had come to a place, I had decided that it was going to be me and Jesus the rest of my life because I love Jesus. And I had so many experiences with Jesus in my house by myself, out in the woods, out in the park, and going fishing. Me and Jesus, even though I couldn't see him or feel him or touch him. And there were times where I so desperately wanted that embrace of real arms, and just to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
But I had decided I had the perfect relationship in Jesus. And it was about that time that I met David. And it was quite coincidental, one of those synchronicity things.
Yeah.
I had gone to Germany, and right the week after the wall fell. And so I was so excited to go and experience that and just have an incredible time. And I had just gotten back from Germany and went to see this pastor friend. He was not my pastor, but he was a pastor friend. And to tell him about my trip to Germany. And he had been adopted by a German family. So he was very interested in Germany. While we were walking out the door, the phone rang, and it was David. And David had spent 2 years doing graduate school in Germany.
Huh.
So the pastor invited him to come just to dinner with us. And we went to Red Lobster and had the most wonderful time. We closed the place down laughing and talking about Germany. We just had a great time. A month later, the pastor invited me to his birthday party. So I went to his birthday party and David was there and we talked a little bit. And I found out that he was a doctor. He was a podiatrist, and I had never heard of him. And I thought doing hospice, I knew every doctor in town.
Yeah.
We didn't use podiatrists.
I know,
I didn't know him.
all your end of life foot needs.
Oh gosh. And so that was in February. And so in March, he called me and asked me out. And I thought, well, it was so fun. We'll talk about Germany and
Yeah.
So we went out to dinner, and never in my life have I experienced anything like this. But I think because maybe both of us had decided, I don't give a flip what anybody thinks. I'm going to just tell my past, lay it all out there. If you're interested, okay. If you're not,
yeah,
I'm not going to waste time. And so we did that. And, at times I was like, you did what? And he was like, you did what? And we laughed and we had the best time. It was like we were 16 years old, like little kids, And so it was that night, I think, that very first date that we just really fell in love. And that was in February. He asked me to marry him in July, and we married in October.
Wow.
And we both left hospice and had been invited by a large international ministry to come to Florida. So
what? And was that Benny Hinn?
That was.
Because I was like, I think they were out of Florida at that time.
They were out of Orlando.
And how was it that you were invited?
A friend of a friend that knew us.
So this friend of a friend was like, hey, they need some help, volunteers.
They needed help with their AIDS ministry.
AIDS ministry.
And because David was a doctor, they wanted him on staff to verify healings.
Okay, so anyone that doesn't know Benny Hinn, a big portion of his ministry is healings. I mean, they'll bring up people in wheelchairs. There's wheelchairs flying everywhere. There's people falling, and it's quite a to-do. It's
very much.
It's a lot. And I remember waiting. I went to one of his crusades that came in Dallas in college. And it was just, it was just my wild college years, was my Benny Hinn years, racing home at lunch to watch This Is Your Day, kind of a thing. What? So you were invited to be a part of this healing, almost like televangelist ministry.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It was big,
Yeah.
Back in the day, that was.
He was right.
Big.
He was starting to really.
And here's the truth. It's real.
Yeah.
But Benny Hinn wanted all of the medical documentation when somebody went back to their doctors and said they had been healed of this or that or the other, that he wanted the medical documentation so that there wasn't any question, in his mind, the staff's mind, or if somebody asked him to prove it, or for the patient to even know for themselves whether they'd been healed or not. Mm-hmm. And David was the one that would look over the documentation and say, this is real, this isn't, this is manufactured, this doesn't mean they're healed. These things aren't saying that.
Oh, interesting.
So he did that, and we both worked with the AIDS ministry, and it was full time because people were calling in from all over the world, and their normal phone staff, which was like 30, 40 people, did not know how to handle it. And so all of those calls came to us, and we would talk with the HIV, the AIDS, any type of sexual thing that was not heterosexual, and anything that they did not know how to handle. We would handle. And it was lovely. Met some wonderful people. But learning how a huge international ministry works was not lovely. Everybody was vying for Benny's attention, including the pastor that was over us, who had been with Benny since Benny was a teenager.
Wow.
And it was ugly. It was really ugly from working inside of it. Can't say Benny was ugly, but the people that were working there, just the greed and the greed of time and the greed of fame and the greed of the people that were under there. They were good people. It's just that it created this atmosphere of trying to climb a ladder, or have something special. And that was not where we were. We did it for like almost a year, like 11 months, and we couldn't do it anymore.
Wow. That short of a turnaround.
And then my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And I was like, we're going on to Abilene. There's nothing in Abilene. Okay. And at that time, I didn't think there was any type of spirit-filled, what do you call it?
Full
Charismatic,
gospel.
full gospel.
Mhm.
Nothing like that was in Abilene when I was here in the 70s.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
And we were like, we're going back. What are we going to do? We won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we walked into that church that day, and it was home. It was beautiful.
Mm.
The front of the church was full of young people dancing their butts off, you know, and just having a blast, and people were friendly, and we were like, yeah, this is home. And it was for many years.
Would you be open to talking about the tooth thing?
Oh yeah, that came after we came back from the Caribbean.
Okay.
David went back to medical school.
That's right, because you were away for a while.
Yeah.
And then when I met you is when I was like, okay, everyone seems to know these people. I've never met them before, but they used to be here. Okay, and so this thing with the tooth, if you're like, what are we talking about teeth? It seems to be a pattern within these miracle churches where there's fillings and teeth turn to gold, and people are like, that is the craziest thing. You know, it wasn't the first time I'd heard about that, but it seemed to be this boom of gold teeth during this one, I don't know.
Yeah, it was a season of something.
Yeah, some kind of revival.
Yeah.
It was like citywide teeth goldness. So fill us in on your experience with that.
My experience with that was, I was not in the mood. If you've ever just been not in the mood, I don't have it. I don't want to do this.
Yes.
Blah. You know, David and I had probably had a spat about something, and we were both just kind of.
Okay, so here we are at this. Was it at a service?
It was at a service,
and you're just kind of there sucking your teeth.
We were on the front row to help. You know, whatever was going to happen, but I wasn't. There's just sometimes you're just not there. You're not in it. I'm not, and I don't remember even what caused it, but I was just like, I am not in this. And so we were supposed to be taking flashlights around and looking at people's teeth, you know, and stuff. And we were like, do we really have to do this? You know, I knew it was real. Don't get me wrong. But there was just that night, I was just not there. Anyway, so David finally, I go, well, look at my mouth, you know. And he goes, you've got a gold tooth. Did you ever have a gold tooth? I said, no. He goes, you have a gold tooth. And I'm like, and I went and I looked and I was like, I have a gold tooth.
And you didn't feel.
Why did I have a gold tooth?
You didn't feel.
Oh, anything? I just remembered. The reason why I was not there was because my back was killing me. It was hurting so bad. And I didn't know what was wrong with it. I'd been having problems for a few months.
Wow.
And so I'm like, I don't want the hell to have a gold tooth. I want my back healed.
See, now that's something, because I'm like, okay, I know someone that had a little filling kind of bubble up when they were a teenager, but then over the years she's had root canals and horrible teeth, you know, and these things where it's like, you know, you could have healed my back. What is all this? What does it even mean? So I guess a lot of that, where is the tooth?
It's the very back one up here.
The back, because I can see as you've been talking, there's something been shining back there. There is a gold tooth.
I don't know what. I look still occasionally. Go, is it still there? Since I'm not going to church anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, can you? Yeah, and it's still really gold.
It's very gold.
It's like brand new, stinking shine. That is.
I broke 2 teeth in the last month. I'm going to have them both cut out. But I still have this gold sucker.
Oh, I know. He's going to be in there to the very end. Wow. I bequeath my gold tooth.
Yes, exactly. Check this out and see if it's real gold.
Incredible. So it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
And so it's like, what's the point of all this other than to create not only hysteria, but also this sense, and I know my experience was, okay, there's going to be a healing, or even right before Benny Hinn, there's going to be a healing service tonight. I've got to act perfectly and walk.
Got to be in the right.
Just got to be right. You got to psych yourself out. I even saw this at the Jordan River with people getting baptized. They just had to psych themselves out, and it's exhausting. And then nothing happens, so you feel like you didn't do enough, or maybe there's unconfessed sin. All this, it's such a mind fuck. But here you are, like, I'm not in the mood. Screw all this. You know. And then you get the blessing. That would have pissed me off.
I know. It was just weird. I've had many, many healings in my life in services. And I've had very many people read my mail with prophetic gifts.
Yeah.
And so in my heart of hearts, I know nothing is impossible. I really know that. But I still struggle with things. I mean, it's like, am I going to struggle till my last breath with some areas or something? Yeah, I think so. That's my answers. Yes, I think so. It's about this life and what we get to experience and what we get to do and how many choices we get to make.
So what you're saying is, yes, you believe in healing, but you also believe that there's pain, and that's part of our experience in life, or illness, or
I believe shit happens.
Yeah,
that's the title of my book. I haven't ever written it, but it's like that's my experience. Is it happens to the good? Well, the Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust. You know, and suffering is real. I've never met a person that doesn't suffer, and that suffering comes from the thought or the idea or the belief that we're separated, from the God of all creation, the God that is, whether you call it God or source or universe or whatever the name is. I like to believe, like our Jewish brothers and sisters, the name is so holy we can't even say it, and the name, who knows that we have the name right?
I know, right?
I know. And who knows that we have the gender right? I don't think God is a man. I don't think he's sitting up there.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I was telling someone about a very powerful prayer. I was praying, and they were like, "Well, were you praying in Jesus' name, or
we were taught that?
Were you praying to somebody else?" It was like, well, I didn't add sincerely in Jesus, or I didn't, it wasn't specifically addressed. It wasn't a letter, but I just assume that's, my, I'm not praying to the devil, so it's just kind of like, even then you may not get the name right, but it's about the heart.
It has to be about the heart. I can remember sitting in my little Baptist church here in Abilene as a teenager, and some missionaries came. And see, I didn't know doctrine. I really didn't. I mean, I knew the 4 spiritual laws, and I didn't really agree with them, but I could quote them, But I was sitting there listening to this missionary, and I remember feeling this call on my life. It was like, and I saw this picture in my mind of a sea of black faces, and I was standing in front of them. And so my whole life, after being a teenager, I thought I was going to be a missionary to Africa. That's how small my thinking was. Well, when David and I went to the Caribbean for medical school, we had been on the island 2 days, and we get a knock at our door, and there's a black gentleman standing there. And he said, "Are you Miss Wood?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I heard you work for Benny Hinn. Can you come preach Sunday morning?"
Oh my goodness.
And I'm like, "Who told you that?" Because, I mean, we had been on the island 2 days. I didn't know anybody.
Unbelievable.
It's a small island. It's only 5 square miles. So somebody in the school had said something to somebody who'd said something to somebody who'd said something to somebody.
That quick. And you did preach.
I did, that Sunday. And I looked out, and I'm like, holy cow, they're all black. It's that sea of black faces. And this little church sits on the side of the mountain with no screens, just wood shutters that they open. And I look out, and they're right, there's the ocean. And it was that aha moment of, oh my gosh, this is it. It's in the Caribbean. This is the sea.
Here you are. You're like,
oh my,
Here I am.
Here I am. I did hear. It's like, I did hear.
I didn't just see crazy things.
No,
that really was real.
And so we got to plant a church on the island of medical students.
Wow.
Still going, and so that was fun. But there's been all of these things that I know are real. And I think it's been about 7 years that I quit going to church, because probably 10 years ago, or if not more, I had the real revelation, I mean, down to my core, that you don't go to church. You are the church. Every single one of us, you know, the ecclesia, we help each other, you know, and having those kind of revelations and really knowing that, because all of my life, before David and after David, we have had such extreme experiences with every tribe, not every, but, you know, a lot of tribes, a lot of nations, a lot of spiritualities, a lot of denominations. And we have experienced love across all of those. And the reason I believe we've experienced it is because we were looking for it. We were very, very loving and accepting and non-judgmental people. And guess what happened to us? We got to experience loving and wonderful and non-judgmental people. They didn't judge us because we love Jesus. They didn't love Jesus. They may love somebody else, you know, but they loved. And they had the connection. You cannot deny the connection. None of us can deny love. You know when you walk up to somebody, if they are loving you or if they're hating you. We know love. You can tell by a meal if somebody cooked it in love.
Yeah.
You know?
That is what is so powerful about that too, is my experience with church, with God, is not love and hope I don't cry. And so it would just boggle my mind, and it would insult me, and it would frustrate me when I would see people that seemed to be held in love, because I didn't understand. And so I think of people that really feel so screwed over by God and feel like it's the unjustness and the sickness is knit into our being. You know, you see it in humanity, you see it in the animal kingdom. We are horrible to each other. God does not exist. And you're looking for love, and it really is like your perception kind of opens up heaven or hell, like choose a door. But it really is amazing how you've had these experiences, and love has kind of kept you almost in this protective place. Do you feel like in all of these, like with the Benny Hinn ministry or with the church that you eventually left, did you feel at any time like your perspective was swayed because of their dogma, or you were able to hold your own because of love?
I think because I didn't have a religious childhood, the beliefs that I developed were my own. And so I wasn't influenced by adults.
Yeah.
That when I realized that some of the dogma and theology that I had learned in fundamental Christianity was wrong, I learned to keep my mouth shut.
Okay.
I learned to keep my mouth shut in the church.
Yeah.
Because if, like in the 4 spiritual laws, the very first one is you are sinful and separated from God, and there's this big gulf between you and God.
Yes, I do remember that picture.
Yes, I see that picture. Do you know how wrong that is? Right. Do you know how wrong that is?
Yeah. And like you say, the suffering is because we believe we're separate.
We believe we're separate. How could we be separate? How could we ever be separate from the God of all creation? There's no way. There's no way we could ever be separate from God. And that kids grow up in that.
Yeah.
You are ugly. You are awful. You're a sinner.
Shame on you.
Shame on you. Yes. My parents never said that to me. Shame on you.
Really?
They said you could do better. You know, why'd you do that to your sister? You know, she's your sister.
Yeah.
I never said shame on you.
Yeah.
I felt shame myself.
Yeah.
You know, talk about 2 abortions, you know, as a believing Christian.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
so you must not have really been saved if that's
not have really been. but I never doubted it. I never doubted. You know why? Because I knew God. I knew love.
Yeah.
Because God is not the God with the whip. But when children are taught that on a little felt board, you are sinful and separated from God, and you need to say this little prayer and ask Jesus into your heart. Well, where do you think Jesus is?
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
do you really think we should save babies, you know, because they've come together with a sperm and an egg and they're growing in their mother's womb, and is God there with them? You know, are they sacred and holy and so in the womb they are, and then they're born? Are they still, you know, is God still with them? Is God with them, you know, until the age of accountability, and then he leaves?
I know,
Jesus leaves them and waits for him to come back.
I know, right? What bullshit.
Does that make sense? Really? I believed that for a lot of years, just because some adult fed it to me. Yeah. And I could follow it in the Bible, a Romans road.
Yeah, the Roman
you know.
road.
But then I also know what can separate you from the love of God. Neither life nor death, nor this nor that. I can't even quote it right now.
Yeah.
But nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing. So every human being that I look at has the Christ Spirit, God in them. Does that mean everybody behaves well? No, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Is there something valid about knowing that the Christ Spirit is awakened in you, to know that? Yes. Some people don't know. Some people don't know God loves them. Just like you're saying, they've been told and they've seen on television that God is up there and he's keeping a list, just like Santa Claus. Mm-hmm. You know, and hopefully, you know, in some denominations you've done enough good to outweigh the bad. And then you get to go to this wonderful place, and if you don't, you're going to go to this bad place, and you are going to burn in hell forever and ever.
Yeah. Which already seems insult to injury, because you're like, hello, we are living in hell. Like, we get hell after hell.
I'm not even going to go into it. That's a whole nother show.
That's another.
But all you have to do, we all have internet. All you have to do is study it. Just go study it. If you think I'm crazy, just go study it for yourself. Don't trust me. Don't trust anybody.
Yeah.
Look into it for yourself and just see how long we've had a hell doctrine. It's not been forever. The early church didn't have hell doctrine.
The early church did not have a hell doctrine.
And can you imagine a God that loves you so much, and then it's going to put your parents or your brother or your siblings or your best friend in a place where they're going to feel fire burning them forever? I don't want that God.
Yeah, for real.
I don't want that God.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not my God. It's just not. And I won't go that way anymore, and I won't keep my mouth shut either.
Yes, exactly.
You know, because there's a lot of people walking around that feel like God hates them because of their behavior, something they've done. I've worked several walk to Emmauses and spoken privately with people about their private lives and things that nobody knows that they've done, and they've carried it for years. The guilt, the shame, all of this stuff, you know. And that's just not how God is. It's just not. And leaving the church gave me time. And I say leaving the church, going to church. I still have community. I still have you.
Yes.
You know, and I still have others.
Yeah.
And we have gone on. Our box has gotten bigger. Yeah. You know, I would say we're out of the box, but I believe the boxes just get bigger. Now I am so in touch with everything that I'm feeling on the inside. Because guess where the kingdom of God is? According to the Bible, it's in us. Kingdom of God is in us. Everything we need is in us. We don't have to look outward. We can look inward. Because if we really believe that there is a God, that God is in us. That spark of divinity, that fire of divinity is in us, and wants more than anything for us to not have to suffer.
Wow.
not have to feel that separation.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what would happen if we really knew that? What we could do? So I'm till I take my last breath, I'm going to be discovering things about God that I didn't learn going to church. And it's just such a mystery now. I don't know anything for sure, like in doctrines and all of that stuff. I don't even talk about it because I know this: God is love. Love loves.
Yeah.
And love continues to love. And love goes beyond all measures to keep on loving. And I know my Hindu brothers that love God, love the same God I do. Does it look the same? No. Would I agree with all their culture things and their spiritual things? No, it's not for me. And after years, these 7 years out of church and even exploring the friends that I've had and what they really believe, I've come to know that it's a mystery. And I don't understand the mystery, but I know this. How many kinds of trees are there? How many kind of insects are there? How many kinds of birds are there? And guess what? We're all connected. Somehow we're all connected. And that has to be through an energy, through a source, through God, through universe, through whatever that is. But that whatever that is love.
Yeah.
And it has all of us
Yeah.
wrapped in that. The suffering is when we don't know that we're wrapped in that.
I don't even know how to wrap this episode up, you guys. That I cried so many times editing this interview because, once again, I'm so thankful for people like Denae in my life that cut through all of the judgment and the religious spirit that just always has to slap your wrist, throw shame at you, and to have somebody see through all of that and say, where is the love in this? Because if there is no love, this is not truth. Yeah. I don't know how to better wrap it up than to say, without love, there is no truth. Can we be so bold as to go there? I think so. Part of me wants to share a little bit more on a solo episode just of my spiritual journey. Like, I've alluded to experiences in church. A lot of them were seriously fucked up. But I want to be able to have a so what factor in that, a SWAT factor, and not it just be like this bashing or like ruminating over old things. I want some redemptive quality to it. But it is so much a part of my life, and it has directed my perspective. And so we'll see. We'll see if I have the words, the courage. I have no idea. But it is something in the future that I would like to share more about. With that said, if there is something that you would like to hear more about, if you'd like to be on the show, drop a comment, join me on Instagram. I'm always posting reels on there, on the Sweat Podcast page of whatever is on my mind that day. So join the conversation and drop me a comment if you have any suggestions or feedback or things you'd want to hear more about. Thanks as always for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening. Join us on Instagram at SWUT Podcast. That's SWUTPODCAST for further conversations, insights, and behind-the-scenes content from today's episode. And for the complete viewing experience, tune into Shall We Unpack This on YouTube. We'll see you next week.